What's going on, guys, and welcome back. So here we go again. Las Vegas is this weekend. I'm actually have some free time today, so I have a bunch of videos that I'm actually going to get out because I want to try and help you guys be ready for DLC Las Vegas. And then after cramming in a bunch of videos this week, probably gonna try to get back to that schedule how I've mentioned a couple times now, 2 to 3 videos a week, something like that, maybe more if I get free time. But life has been very, very busy, for the better. But anyway, today we're talking about the best decks for DLC Vegas. There is the spreadsheet linked down below. As of right now, it won't be updated for the last couple weeks. I do have the information. I just need to type it in. So by tonight, tomorrow morning, you can check and that will be updated. If you look from the release through the end of August, though, that information is all there. But we all know formats shift, right? So formats shift a little bit, and I don't want to say look at that and disregard it, but look at that and take it with a grain of salt. So we're going to talk about 15 decks today and see where they rank. If your deck does not get mentioned, it's probably in that rogue category. Tier 1 is going to be the decks that you truly expect to win an event, to be able to make a deep run in the event. Tier 2 is kind of those decks where with a good pilot and a couple favorable matchups, they might make that top 4 push and maybe even end up winning the event. Rogue decks can win events. We've seen it before. Joshua Paltry and his Amber Amethyst, not hyper aggro list is the epitome of this, where the right deck, the right day, the right pilot, any deck can see success. However, for those rogue decks, it is very unlikely. However, they might still get you your Let It Go promo or more. So first and foremost, we have Amethyst Steel Hyper Aggro. This is the more aggressive version of the deck. I'm going to put it down in rogue. I think that it can be decent. However, it struggles into Steel Song, and we all know that Steel Song is a huge threat this format. So in addition to that, I just think that it's not the best hyper aggro deck. Last format, hyper aggro actually was a little bit better-ish positioned. Amber Amethyst, hyper aggro definitely got a huge boost with the latest set, but this deck I think was in a better position last format. Just with the decks that you expected to play against. I think things like Ruby Sapphire have sped up, and they don't just hard lose to hyper aggro as much as they did last format either. So I'm not really big on Amethyst Steel hyper aggro. However, we got a couple more Amethyst Steel decks to talk about, and the next one is Pete's Bounce House, focusing on Pete Game Referee, shutting down your opponent's actions, bouncing it with your Fox, with your Snake, with your Elephant, and just being able to play a pretty aggressive curve line. Even you can play Maleficence if you want on 1 and Smee on 2 and then start to get into your mid game. But you can play, again, you don't have to, you can play these aggressive threats and play a more fast version of this deck. Or you don't need to. You can play things like Captain Hook with the Challenger to be able to threaten the Daisy Duck a little bit more. Otherwise, obviously, 3 doesn't take out the 4, but you put 3 on her, she has 1 left, and you survive the hit. So then if they try to do anything, you survive it. Anyway, or things like Robin Hood. You also have the Archimedes shift line for a strong turn 3 shift, evasive, multiple quester. I think Pete's Bounce House has a lot of good going for it, and I'm still surprised it doesn't have more results. However, over the last 2 weeks, it has been getting more popular. We do have another one here, the Jafar Wheel. I'm going to put them near the top of Rogue. Definitely better than Amethyst Steel Hyper Aggro, I think. But if you're looking at Amethyst Steel, I think playing the Pete's Bounce House is the best way to do it. Do you play 4 Pete? I do personally. Do you have to? I think 3 is acceptable because of the bounce, but the 4 just makes it so that you see him more often, and you can always ink if you have multiples and your bouncers. So I would rather play 4 just to ensure that I see it more often. And again, if you see multiples, you can always ink it if you need to. Jafar Wheel, though, again, it can take advantage of Robin Hood or Archimedes shift line, Smee on 2, and then you play a Jafar on 3 or 4, and then to shift Jafar 5. The deck's just got a lot going for it. Or even if you don't play Smee on 2, like you can just, when Bucky format, you'd hold the resources, but you can win on turn 5 very, very easily with this deck if you set up the Robin Hood or the Archimedes shift on 3 or 4, and then your Jafar shift on 5. The problem is it's pretty linear, and if they disrupt your Jafar shift, it can get kind of awkward. So I do recommend the Robin Hood package for sure. It just helps as a pivot play line to still be able to win and close out games if Jafar doesn't go off. But essentially, you shift Jafar on 5, you sing the Whole New World, you get the 7. If you hit another Whole New World, then you can sing it with your Robin Hood or your Archimedes and get another 7 lore. In addition to those 14 right there, you're questing again with Smee to 16, and the prior turns you already would have been past 4, so winning on turn 5 is rather easy. It just can be kind of tunnel visioned and linear and easy to disrupt. The best deck of the format, Steel Song. I don't think there's any shock here, right? Like, there's no surprise here. I think this is going to be the most represented deck in Top Cut. The biggest thing, however, is their Popsicle matchup is still not that great. And with the rise in Steel Song, we've actually seen Popsicle these last 2 weeks outperforming Steel Song overall because it just has such a good matchup to it. Think about last format with Bucky being the clear best deck, but Blue Steel just started to dominate and do so well because it had such a good Bucky matchup, right? So Popsicle is that answer. Steel Song is absolutely the best deck of this format, but Popsicle is such a good answer for it, and lately has actually been outperforming Steel Song. Emerald Ruby Evasive. It's kind of like a aggro, can be aggro, difficult to deal with. I'm going to put it down in Rogue, though. I don't like this deck into major events like this. I think like 40-50 person set championship, this deck can absolutely clap. But something about, those 9 rounds, something about just, 1,000 people. I don't think this deck can perform as well in these major tournaments. I think it can perform really well in big tournaments and really, really well in small tournaments, but these major tournaments, I still don't think the deck has what it takes. Muse's Songs, the Emerald Sapphire deck that really exploded onto the scene early on in this format, and it looked like it was going to take off. It was just like one of those things where I actually wasn't a huge fan of it, and I was like, is this deck going to stick around? Well, in the last 2 weeks, no, it has 0 tops in the last 2 weeks. This deck has definitely fallen off. Not to say it can't do well. I think that things like Popsicle, like Steel Song, just got a little more refined and more optimized. And I think in doing that, the Muses deck just kind of fell behind because it's like, where does it place in? If you're playing a tempo-based strategy, Amethyst Emerald is just far better. I don't think this deck's gonna do very good at Vegas either. Pete's Bounce again is one that I think could sneak in there. That's why we got up at tier 2. We got our couple up there. So what about Mufasa? I'm actually going to put Mufasa up in tier 2. It's another deck that benefited from Daisy Duck because now it has another strong 1-drop that is actually not bad to hit off Mufasa, and it's also not bad late game, having 4 willpower and questing for 2. Mufasa is just one of those fun decks that seems to always be in that mid to back end to tier 2, and it's just one of those decks that if you're not ready for it, it just does really well in certain events. I think that there's going to be a Mufasa in top 64. I really, really do. Just one, though. And I don't think they make it past I'm going to say they don't make it to 16. Do they make it to 32? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised. Pete's Bounce House, I think we're going to see a couple, like probably 2 to 4 in top 64, if I had to guess. Green Steel. Where do I want to put Green Steel? The deck's actually been doing decent. Towards the end of August, it started to pick up a lot of steam. And then into September, it's actually topping at a decent little bit. Again, I'll have that spreadsheet updated for you guys, and we'll break down what the deck lists are looking like moving forward. So I think Green Steel it's one of those decks where I definitely think it's good enough to top, but I don't trust it to make a strong run or a strong push into like top 8, top 4, something like that. A deck that I do trust, however, Amethyst Emerald Tempo. Clarabelle was so good for this deck. Mother Gothel is so good for this deck. And the deck can be aggressive or it can be more mid-range. It can be a little more control-y. The deck has such a good toolbox, and I really, really like what you can do with it. You don't have to focus on the Merfolk Flynn discard early package either. There's other routes that you can go with it now. And I think that the versatility of this deck is just really, really strong. And again, in the last 2 weeks, it's topped at about 11%. So for me, it's actually good enough to bump it into that tier 1 category. It does have a handful of wins too. I think this deck is one to not sleep on, and I'm going to go ahead and say they get 4 to 6 in the top 64 of Vegas. And don't be surprised if one of these makes a push into the top 8. My top 8 I said 2 Steel Song, 2 Popsicle, and then 1 Tempo, 1 Ruby Amethyst, 1 Pete, and then 1 other. And I'm leaning towards like the Lemon Lime songs, but who knows? I'm going to leave it as an open other and see how that goes. Ruby Amethyst, right? Ruby Amethyst, the deck that just never goes away. Kind of how we talked about Steel Song being the best and Popsicle being the answer, kind of like last format where it was Bucky and Blue Steel. Obviously, Popsicle was really good last format too, but it just kind of had this weird place where it fell off at the end and it was more Blue Steel or Bucky or Ruby Amethyst, yada, yada, yada. But now this format again, it's kind of like the same thing with different decks, right? Steel Song, Ruby with Popsicle. And then Ruby Amethyst just kind of comes in as that neutral answer, that just strong against everything, not really weak against anything. It's not guaranteed to win versus anything, but you have a chance versus everything. It's just such a strong and consistent deck, and it's actually my deck to pick for I think this deck wins the event. I have Ruby Amethyst over Steel Song in my prediction, and I actually have 2 Steel Song, Tempo, and Ruby Amethyst as my expected top 4. Let me know what you guys think is going to be the top 8, top 4 winning deck, all that good stuff down in the description or in the comments below. You can't comment in the descriptions. Lemon Lime songs. So taking advantage of Amber and Emerald songs, Muses bouncing your own aerial for the recursive advantage. This deck can go heavy into the discard if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. It's a pretty strong deck, and it feels like this is the deck that has the highest ceiling. Like if you hit your curve and they can't answer it, this is the best deck. However, if you miss it, the deck seems to lose to itself more than a lot of these other decks do, and for that reason, it's hard to put it higher up into the tier list. I'm going to have it right there with Pete's Bounce House, though. I think in our tier 2, these are the 2 decks to look out for the most, and I think they have the strongest chance to make it into like that top 8, top 4. And again, I wouldn't be surprised, and I do expect one of each of these into the top 8. As far as top 4, though, again, I got 2 Song, 1 Ruby Amethyst, and 1 Tempo as my top 4 decks. Blue Steel, we've kind of talked about him a little bit. What is going on with Blue Steel? Where has this deck gone? Why isn't this deck doing as well? I thought it was going to be a really strong deck. I still think it's a really strong deck. However, it just seems like, what is going on? I'm going to put Blue Steel in the middle of tier 2. I don't quite have them going on that top 8 run, but again, I do think we're going to have like 2 Blue Steels in top 64. The deck's really good, and I'm just, like I said, kind of confused as to why we're not seeing more of it topping events. Blurple, a deck that was hyped like no other, and well, it's kind of living up to the hype. It's been a solid tier 2 deck. I don't think it has the closing power of something like Popsicle or Ruby Amethyst, or the overall consistency of Ruby Amethyst or Tempo, but it's got a nice mix going for itself where it has strong late game, strong mid game. It is consistent. It just feels like it's a little lacking compared to these 3 decks up here, and for that reason I'm going to put it in tier 2. We already mentioned that Amber Amethyst was the hyper aggro deck of choice. If you're playing aggro, this is the deck. It's going to be another tier 2 deck. I think it's one that maybe makes a strong run. Does it? I don't know. This is that one where I wouldn't be surprised to see 1 or 2 in top 64, and maybe they even make a run to 16. But at the same time, I could just as easily see this deck not topping at all. It's just hyper aggro is always in such a weird format where it feels like you just need your matchups to hit. You need that little bit of help through RNG to really be able to take advantage of it. And being in such a strong Steel Song meta, it just makes it tough. But as the format goes more towards Popsicle, it opens the door a little bit for this deck. But again, not really, because Popsicle has better answers to this. They already had Brawl for your Daisy Duck. They could play Sisu for your Daisy Duck. They have answers already, and I think that Popsicle just overall is better against aggro this format compared to last format, and that's why we're not seeing Hyper Aggro really take off the way that some people expected it to. But overall, again, Tier 1, these are the decks that absolutely you expect to make a strong run. You could argue about Tempo not being quite in that same class as those others, and I would agree. But at the same time, when we look at the results through the first month and a half, and especially in the last 2 weeks, Tempo is clearly better than any deck in Tier 2, at least as far as how it is performing. So, it makes a cut for Tier 1 for me. Tier 2, all these decks are really strong, and with the right pilot, again, any one of these decks could make a strong run into that top 8, top 4, maybe win the event with the right pairings, but unlikely. Rogue decks, if they're not listed, I'd put them in Rogue, and if they are listed, again, top 64 wouldn't be super surprising, but to make it past the 32 and even into the 16, I'd be shocked to see any of these decks do that. Let me know down below again what you expect to happen for Vegas, and make sure you like, share, subscribe, comment down below. Thank you guys for watching.